Hi, HR Management. Welcome to Module 8, the last week of the class. Please make sure that you pay special attention to the due dates this week. Everything does need to be submitted by Sunday at 11:59 a.m. So you'll have a couple things due right before then. I'm launching this early, so you have time to check that out and get this week's work done. This week, we'll have a discussion post as well as a comprehensive final exam. So in your reading this week over Chapter 15 and Chapter 16, the first thing that you'll learn about is international HR management, which is really important just in the context of work, because a lot of what we buy present day from the U.S. Isn't from the U.S., which means that HR really needs to be managed in international settings as well. So these last two chapters start to get into some of like the strategy as it relates to operating internationally, as well as just overall strategy as an HR professional. This chapter talks about something called a PES scan, which is a lot of times something we do in strategic planning. But if you're operating internationally, something you have to do on a regular basis. So a PES scan is essentially doing an environmental scan on political, environmental, social, cultural, and technological analyses. Conditions constantly change in an environmental setting. Many organizations operate internationally in very specific countries and very specific facilities for this reason. So this chapter will talk a bit about the 4 different types of organizational functions internationally and the different ways that a company can staff international operations as it relates to people. Sometimes this is very restricted by laws and not necessarily their ideal choice. You'll also learn a bit about some of the challenges of recruiting internationally. And you'll find that a lot of organizations, just depending on their size, actually have a global manager to kind of just manage some of these HR things, as well as the strategy of operating internationally. If the company is lucky enough to have a global manager, usually that person works very closely with an HR manager. But in a small setting, sometimes the HR manager really wears both of those hats and focuses on training and development in another country, ensuring that branding is consistent, ensuring that there are effective recruiting practices, product quality, you name it. So obviously hourly wages can be very different in other countries. And this chapter will touch on some of those hourly wages, as well as something called a global compensation system, which is kind of a centralized way of paying people and studying what the trends are versus a decentralized system. So what this chapter wraps with is really that the HR management professional has to be good at analyzing the international labor environment and has to be good at constantly doing a PES scan to keep up to date on what's going on. Chapter 16 leads us into implementing HR strategy, high performance work systems, which is the last chapter of the book. I really like how we conclude with this chapter because it talks about balancing challenges and opportunities in a proactive manner to reach both short-term and long-term organizational goals. And that really is the role of the HR manager to set the tone. So this chapter talks about HR high-performance work systems, which is essentially like a forward-thinking HR manager as the person who creates the culture and the processes. This chapter will talk about the building blocks of what a high performance work system is and how you design it. And then finally, this chapter dives a little bit into what some of those complementary HR policies and practices are that would align with an HR work system. That could be anything from staffing, training and development, aligned technology, a communication plan, having regular process audits, things of that nature. So why I like this particular chapter is it really wraps up everything in terms of something called strategic alignment. So in my job at the college at strategic planning, this is something that we're trying to achieve that is really hard to do, strategic alignment. It's essentially alignment with your people, your culture, your processes, and technology. So more than ever, this chapter should tell you how critical the influence of an HR manager is and someone that's proactive and really informing the work organizationally that you're doing in terms of short and long-term goals, as well as culture. So I hope you all have a great week. Again, please pay attention to the dates. Absolutely anything that we've talked about that maybe you've missed that you wanted to make up has to be in by Sunday at 11:59 a.m. so that I can spend Sunday afternoon and evening wrapping up your grades. So I'm here to help with anything you need. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I hope you look forward to a short break from classes.